Okay. Herkese merhaba and welcome to the Anatolian lectures for this year. And excuse me, can you hear me? Any problem? If you any problem, please write into chat box. I think everybody can hear. Dear colleagues and dear guests and dear students, first of all, and before I start my words, I would like to wish all of us, everyone, a happy and healthy new year. As I said before, welcome to the ARWA Anatolian 2023 lecture program. This season, we will be with you in 8 different lectures for 3 months, from January, beginning of January to the end of the March. In this event, which will be held for the 3rd time this year, we try to make choices in a different and wide range as possible. These lectures generally related with the recent studies in Anatolian archaeology. They focus on different studies from the Neolithic period to the Lydian period, end of the late Iron Age. In addition to this, and then presentation on interdisciplinary studies will take place in our program. We all unquestionably agree that archaeological projects are now studies with interdisciplinary understandings. Today's first lecture is an interdisciplinary studies examples. This presentation is about landscape archaeology, which is a common field of study in archaeology recently. Our speaker, Bülent ARIKAN, in his paper titled "The Comparison of Early Bronze Age Land Use Patterns Across Anatolia Through the Agent-Based Modeling," deals with the reconstruction, the socio-ecological environment of ancient societies by making use of various archaeological data. Before moving on to our speech, I would like to briefly introduce our speaker, dear Bülent ARIKAN. He's completed his undergraduate and graduate studies at the Department of Archaeology at Bilkent University. And he completed his doctorate at the Department of Anthropology at Arizona State University. Associated Professor Bülent ARIKAN is now the head of the Department of Ecology and Evolution at the Eurasia Institute of Earth Science within Istanbul Technical University. ARIKAN's areas of interest and work are paleo-environmental changes, human impacts, adaptation, resilience, and social complexity in the ancient Near East, paleoclimate modeling, agent-based modeling of the past land use, and landscape evolution. Now I want to talk about some of the projects that ARIKAN has completed. There are 3 important projects. One of them is he completed the project titled as "From the Holocene to the Anthropocene, a new look at the 10,000-year-long history of human environment and climate relationships from the perspective of computational science." This projects and completed between 2017 and 2019 years. Another important project of the ARIKAN is New Perspectives in Archaeology, the socio-ecological agent-based modeling of the early Bronze Age 1 at Arslantepe in Malatya. And the last important project, ARIKAN also did the project titled as Bronze Age Environmental and Socio-Dynamics in the Upper Euphrates and Tigris Basin. This project within the Research Center for the Anatolian Civilization in Koç University. Apart from these projects, the fieldworks that Associated Prof Bülent ARIKAN is continuing are as follows. Now, ARIKAN is a director of Hacılar Musa excavation, Elmalı province in Antalya. And also he is working on another project, Delice Valley in Çorum, North Central Anatolia, archaeology, geoarchaeology and prehistoric mining project. Also, ARIKAN has articles in Science and Social Science Index journals, and he's the co-editor of the newly published volume titled Landscape Archaeology in the Near East, Approaches, Methods, and Case Studies from ArchaeoPress Archaeology series. Now, before moving on to the ARIKAN presentation, I would like to make his short introduction in Turkish. As you see, and even today, majority of our participants are people from Turkey. And if you want, we can, and if you wish, we can continue our activity in both Turkish and English as bilingual. And if you want, can make their comments and questions in Turkish. Please let me for briefly and short introduction in Turkish. Sevgili Türkiye'den katılan dostlarımız, sizler için de çok kısaca, çünkü Arva'nın genel konsepti içerisinde buna da müsaade ediyor. Çok kısaca konuşmacımız ve bugünkü Arva lecture'ları hakkında çok kısa bir bilgi vermek ve daha sonrası Bülent hocamıza bırakmak istiyorum. Biraz önce de ifade ettiğim gibi kısaca bugünkü konuğumuz değerli Bülent ARIKAN Hoca. Kendisi ifade ettiğim gibi şu an İstanbul Teknik Üniversitesi'ndeki Eurasia Yer Bilimleri Enstitüsü'nde ekoloji ve dönüşüm üzerine olan bölümdeki direktör olarak, oranın yöneticisi olarak çalışmakta. Ve Bülent Hoca çok aslında biz arkeolojiye hani çok uzak olmasak da çok da hepimizin anlayabildiği, hepimizin çok kolaylıkla kavrayabildiği bir alan olmayan çevre-insan ilişkisi ve bu çevre-insan ilişkisinde biz arkeologların yıllarca ürettiği ama bunu biraz geç kavramaya başladığımız bir alanda çalışıyor ve bu alanda bizleri aydınlatıyor. Ben o yüzden kendisiyle ve çalışmalarını hayranlıkla izliyorum. Ve hocamız bize bugün yine uzun süredir üzerinde çalıştığı ve biraz daha uzmanlaşma diyebiliriz belki, değil mi hocam? Erken Tunç Çağı üzerine bir yerleşim arazi kullanımının şablonunu, bir modellemesi üzerinden bahsedeceğiz. Biraz zor bir konuyla aslında Arva'ya başlıyoruz. Beni de çok tedirgin etti. Anlamak, yorum yapmak ve üzerinde sorular sormak. İşin doğrusu ifade etmem gerekirse benim için de biz artık belki ikinci kuşak bir arkeolog jenerasyonuyuz. Bizlerin de son anda tanıma fırsatı bulduğu, önemsediğimiz ama anlamakta güçlük çektiğimiz bir alan. O yüzden şimdi Bülent Hocama sözü kısaca vermek istiyorum. Ve kendisinin sunumundan sonra soru ve yorumlarınızı ifade ettiğim gibi iki dilde de yapabiliriz diye tahmin ediyorum. Çünkü bizim de kendi öğrencilerimiz çok fazla sayıda var. İngilizce o açıdan da sıkıntı olabilir. Evet Bülent Hocam, söz sizde, buyurun.
All right, thank you so much for all this nice introduction, and I'm very excited about giving this talk, the first of the 2023 series. The title is, I believe it's self-explanatory, so I'm going to basically talk about how we apply agent-based modeling in order to understand the land use and land cover changes as a result of both anthropogenic impacts and also natural processes. And we will be focusing on the early Bronze Age. So this talk will basically lay out the methodology of agent-based modeling. And then I will be giving two examples. But in fact, me and my students We have been working on different parts of Anatolia, so we will be getting results from different parts of the region in the next 4 to 5 years. It is important to understand, however, from the start, why we study coupled systems, especially why do we do it, why these coupled systems are important in archaeology. Coupled systems, by definition, refer to social and ecological systems, the interaction of these two elements. These are not separate realms, rather they are integrated into each other, and they are in fact codependent environments. And understanding how social and ecological systems interact with each other in the long term allows us understanding more complex properties of this coupled systems perspective. And this understanding these dynamics in the long term, understanding how they change through time and across space, enable us to really question the structure of complex systems. And an important result of that is that we can, in fact, visualize the cumulative impacts of these processes and understand how emergent properties come to be. Because by definition, emergent properties can only be observed when long-term complex interactions are taken into account. Coupled systems perspective, as I said, rely on understanding the natural and anthropogenic impacts, the natural processes and anthropogenic impacts. The latter, the anthropogenic impacts, has been very important for the ancient Mediterranean, because this is one of the regions in the old world that has been settled, that has been exposed to human impacts for thousands of years. We have been causing changes on the landscape by our decision-making mechanisms. These decision-making mechanisms eventually bring expected and unexpected consequences. And then we close the cycle by trying to adapt to these changes that we have initiated originally with the first impact. And of course, on the other side, there's the natural process that is going on, partially irrelevant of human actions. Understanding the ecosystemic change has been one of the main debates in academia. I'm showing this fantastic graphic. I'm calling it a fantastic graphic because I'll show you another one. This particular one has been designed by Holling and Winterson in their 2002 publication. But this is fantastic, in my opinion, because it is summarizing the whole complex sequence in one bit. Ecosystem and change basically starts with the release function, with the release quadrant here designated as number 1. This release and reorganization, the next stage, they in fact lay out the infrastructure for highly complicated relationships to emerge. In the growth phase, in the third phase, the intensification of these relationships, resource extractions, integrating of hubs and nodes into a larger, more complex system materializes. And in the final stage, the system itself goes into a conservation and management aspect. This is, I understand that this is somewhat vague because you can apply this to a lot of different areas, but its integration into archaeology has been accomplished initially by Redman and Kinzig in 2007. This is taken from their publication. And as far as I know, there are tens of articles that talk about these stages in archaeological research from different parts of the world, including the old world and the new world. When we talk about release and reorganization stages, we can certainly talk about the Uruk expansion phase, the establishment of the first city-states, then going into the Jemdet Nasr phase, when this reorganization has been solidified, especially in southern Mesopotamia, then leading into the first statehood systems with the phase of exploitation under the early dynastic stage or phase. The conservation of this widely complex system of resource extraction, refining, organization of labor, division of labor, and administering all these natural resources, the transport and the consumption of these natural resources, eventually reaches its peak during the Akkadian and the third phase of Ur dynasty. Now, what does this really mean for agent-based modeling in archaeology? First of all, let's talk about what agent-based modeling does. This is, in fact, a platform, and there are several platforms for agent-based modeling in archaeology. Almost all of these platforms combine these variables that you see on the left side of your screen. They integrate climate dynamics, past climate dynamics. They integrate human adaptive behaviors, and they also integrate the level of complexity added by social organization, the type of social organization that the culture that you're trying to simulate their behavior. And we have to emphasize here that archaeology has a great potential to illustrate these linkages, because these are, as I said, socio-ecological processes, and they are not completely isolated from each other. In fact, they are codependent. Because they are codependent, we can, to a great extent, we can only understand how these variables change through time and across space through archaeological research. Because archaeological research, in fact, gathers and puts them into large repositories. Those repositories of human adaptive behaviors, clues about social organization, how they change, how they evolve in time, and also interdisciplinary research, especially on the environmental change, past environmental change. So if we can gather all these in one platform to build hypotheses and to test them in the long term with the help of advanced computation, supercomputers in one way, then it in fact allows us to connect the past, present, and future in resilience research. And it not only does this, but it also allows archaeology to become a testable field, at least for certain questions. So now let's look at what agent-based modeling in fact does. For the audience that has experience in archaeology, whether they're archaeologists or they're interested in archaeology, the fieldwork side is should be pretty easy to understand. What we basically do as archaeologists is basically go out on the field, either do the surveys or dig, at sites, and then we compile the excavation record. We have to understand that our data that we gather out in the field suffers from taphonomical processes. Okay. These are natural events and also human events, human factors and natural factors that really destroy these records. So whatever we can find at an archaeological site, at an archaeological research, is the remnant of these taphonomic processes. Nevertheless, we have large excavation data. Another understanding, another point of view for past societies comes from the abstraction. Okay, abstraction in a way, and talking about these linkages, talking about these structures, social, economic, political structures, by simplifying them, because agent-based models, by their definition, are limited with the computation power. And our computation power as of 2023 is still limited. Okay, we can certainly calculate much more complex procedures compared to maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but still we cannot really simulate the real world complexity issues. So we have to actually simplify that. So in real world, if there are 10,000 relationships, we try to simplify them by inserting 500, 600 relationship sets. What those agent-based modeling simulations do, in fact, is that they generate the simulation results. So we can, in fact, go in front of these supercomputers and try to build scenarios in order to test the excavation record, in order to compare the results of simulation results with the excavation record. Then we can basically compare two sets of data: the results of the excavation record, the patterns that we see in the excavation record, and then the simulation results. Okay. And the biggest gain, I believe, is that, as I said previously, that we bring, in fact, the hypothesis testing capability to archaeology, which is a discipline, in fact, that really does not have its own methods, but has been borrowing methods from related research areas. So what is the methodology? What are some of these calculations that we talk about? And I have to mention that when I use ABM, this talk, when I refer to an agent-based model, I'm specifically referring to the Medland Modeling Laboratory, MML in short, which has been developed by a team of researchers led by Michael Barton at Arizona State University's School of Human Evolution and Social Change. I'm proud to emphasize that I was, and I'm still part of that lab. When I was a graduate student, I was part of it. I'm still part of the lab as a researcher. There are numerous variables that we use in ABM. The most important of these variables are, in fact, allowing us to map spatiotemporal changes. These include mean annual precipitation and temperature that we gather from paleoclimate models, soil fertility that we measure out in the field most of the time. We also gather archaeological and ethnoarchaeological data about the mean annual agropastoral production, because this model can only simulate agropastoral production, growing wheat and barley, and raising sheep and goats, ovicaprids, changes in population and the needs of the population, human population we're talking about, changes in the land cover, especially the density of the land cover, and also how erosion deposition rates change through time as a result of precipitation, as a result of topographic relief, and also as a result of active human-induced deforestation or devegetation. So our main sources of data include archaeology, environmental proxies, especially pollen and isotopes. Where necessary, we also do geoarchaeological research, as well as paleobotany, zooarchaeology, and ethnoarchaeology. In terms of calculating the impacts of human actions, anthropogenic impacts, we're focusing on three elements. We know that humans actually did agriculture, so they cleared patches of land so that they could actually grow wheat, barley, and other legumes and elements. pastoralism, so they actually had all the caprids, they raised them, and they needed to graze on certain parts of the landscape. And also humans cut down wood in order to burn them for warming or for food processing, for processing raw materials. And also they cut down wood because they needed construction material. So agent-based, this particular agent-based model, MML, simulates these three behaviors. And when it is simulating these three behaviors, it is focusing on the amount of returns from farming and grazing in terms of kilograms per hectare. How much you can produce in one simulation year if you were farming on that specific lot. How much your sheep and goat could munch on these grasses, and how much of an area would they in fact clear from land cover. And in terms of wood gathering, how many kilos per square meter you would be able to remove this vegetation, because these are important in calculations of erosion and deposition. Remember that we're talking about two concurrent factors. One factor is human actions, farming, grazing, wood gathering. And two is the natural processes, surface processes, basically the frequency of rain, the intensity of rainfall, and how much of that rainfall would be able to remove, would be able to carry sediment from one location to another, basically as a result of topographic relief. And when certain decisions are made, especially in terms of identifying the farmland or grazing areas, we use the population calculations. Basically, when we start a simulation, we have to identify one point in time when we have a fairly clear idea about how many households were there, and then we usually assign 4 or 5 individuals per household. And then we use certain ethnographic and ethnoarchaeological reference in order to assign an amount of land to these households so that they could, in fact, start their actions. A good example is, looking at Carol Kramer's and Patty Jo Watson's ethnoarchaeological research in Iran in late 70s and in early 70s. And basically, they mentioned that 1.36 hectare per person is needed in order to sustain one person for one full year. So this is, in most cases, this is our benchmark. And also, when picking these plots for farming, we allow agents to pick the one that is closest to the center of the village, because we're all humans, and I'm very much aware of the fact that most of the time we really do not want to walk long distances. We don't want to walk long distances with heavy stuff on our back. So no one would like to carry, a large. No one would like to have a large
excuse me, your share screen is finished.
Okay, I'll start it again.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, there we are. Next. Okay.
It's okay. Thank you.
No problem. Ekranı kontrolünü aldı o yüzden.
Allah Allah. Bir Oğuz'da vardı. Ben hocam bir saniye müdahale edeyim. Please give me a minute.
Şu an devam edebiliriz hocam.
So I guess everyone can see my screen.
It's okay. We can see. Just
Okay.
slideshow is better, I think.
All right.
Bülent hocam.
Okay. So our agent-based modeling research has been going on. We started running these models in 2014 with the first TÜBİTAK funded project that was focusing on Malatya, Aslantepe. And since then, we have actually completed running agent-based models for the Aslantepe area, for north central Anatolia near Çorum, and also southwestern Anatolia around Burdur. Our current experiments have been going on around Konya, Manisa, and Istanbul. I also have some of my doctoral students are also working on Çorum area and Malatya area in order to advance these ABM platforms by integrating different capabilities. And today I'm going to talk about Aslantepe and Yenibademlihöyük on the island of Gökçeada, Imbros, ancient Imbros. So these are the two examples that I would like to talk about in the context of simulating human-environment interactions through agent-based modeling in the early Bronze Age. These are, to a great extent, contemporary applications, contemporary phases. Okay, so Aslantepe is, most of you may know, is a large, tall mound, about 30 meters tall, covers 4 hectares. It's not a small mound, and it also has a lot of interregional context because of its location at the headwaters, near the headwaters of Euphrates, and at the northern extremity of Mesopotamia. The site allowed access to Mesopotamia, and especially northern Mesopotamia. Also, it has connections with Caucasus and with central Anatolia. The agent-based modeling application here focused on the early Bronze Age 1A and 1B phases, roughly from 4950 calibrated BP to 4700 calibrated PP, so for 250 years. The problem that we try to understand, the hypothesis that we tested here was basically, we know from the archaeological research at Aslantepe that the late Chalcolithic, the end of the late Chalcolithic, level 6A, had a fancy level. The people had 2 temples, 1 palace-like large structure. It was obvious that there was central administration, control over production and redistribution of economic goods. And this was probably a phase when people practiced intensive agriculture, and it was a hierarchic society. And something happens at the end of the late Chalcolithic, and early Bronze Age starts with a very small settlement, roughly 6 units, 6 households, designed around this large central open-air courtyard structure. And based on the geochemical analysis, Marcella Fripane and her colleagues suggested that this might have been a phase where people actually practiced site-tethered pastoralism. We completely lose hierarchy, and there are, in fact, signs of heterarchic tribal organization. And this, in fact, went on for 250 years. And towards the end of Early Bronze Age 1B, we have a large village once again. They're probably practicing heterarchic structures. They probably have heterarchic social organization, but practicing agropastoralism. Okay, the mode of subsistence shifted from site-tethered pastoralism to a combination of agriculture and pastoralism. So our question was here that can we actually simulate this increase in population and this increase in land use patterns? Are we going to see the impacts of it on the agent-based modeling experiments, especially in terms of land use and land cover changes? We tested different scenarios, as you can see here. Okay, a dry climate, transitional climate, wet climate, low, normal, high population densities, and different environments like woodland or shrubland. The results that you see here are in fact referring to woodland environments, which was the environment at the beginning of the Early Bronze Age based on archaeobotanical research. And when we say dry, transitional, wet climate, we're talking about the paleoclimate models. We're talking about data that we gathered from paleoclimate models. We ran the paleoclimate model for this region, and we get the results. So we identify them, we label them as wet climate, and then we actually created a drier climate from these simulation results. We reduced precipitation, annual precipitation by 15%. And then we created a dry climate condition. And then the transitional climate is for 125 years, we start with wet climate. And then the second part of the simulation for the next 125 years, we in fact use the dry climate scenario. So we actually created a hybrid climate scenario here. Low, normal, high population densities basically refer to the starting population. The number of households for Early Bronze Age, 6. We multiplied that by 4. And so our starting population for normal scenario is 24. But we also decreased this by 50% and increased it by 50%. So we created different scenarios. What we see here for 250 years of simulation is
Devam edelim hocam.
All right. So what we tested here, basically for the Early Bronze 1, was that okay, can we really simulate this increase in population and how much they impacted their landscape in terms of land use and land cover change? The archaeological data basically tell us that yes, there is a significant increase in population because the village came back after 250 years. And this is something that we were able to successfully simulate in terms of environmental dynamics as well. So we see a population increase and we see significant land cover change, significant drop in biodiversity. These are all telltales of gradually intensifying agropastoral land use patterns. So after that, let me quickly go to here. So after that, we actually made certain changes. We actually improved the way the Medland Modeling Laboratory was running on computers. We implemented a faster running cycle, and we also tweaked certain aspects of the modeling platform. So it in fact generates much more efficient calculations. And only recently, as of last March, I conducted a series of experiments at Yenibademlihük. This is, in fact, as I said, an island, a Turkish island off the coast of Çanakkale in northern Aegean. It was excavated by Halime Hür Yılmaz from Hacettepe University between 1996 and 2021. She recently retired, but this is basically her excavations exposed an early Bronze Age to 4900, 4700 calibrated BP village. This village is located right here. This is the modern DEM of the area, but paleogeographical research around the site in fact identified the presence of a gulf at the time of the settlement, the presence of a gulf, and the site itself was situated on a rock outcrop. So this is the site itself, and the gulf back in the early Bronze Age was situated right here. And eventually, because of the Holocene increase in sea levels and other natural processes, this gulf became a terrestrial environment. The site is famous for its connections with Troya I culture in terms of its architecture and other material cultural remains. There's an access to the site with a rampart, or rectilinear houses built with stone foundations and mud brick. Intensive use of wood in architecture is recorded. And we know that from archaeological excavations, we know that the inhabitants at Yenibademlihük practiced agriculture and pastoralism, as well as hunting and fishing. In terms of agriculture, wheat, barley, bitter vetch, those were the legumes and produce that they preferred. And pastoralism, we have ovicaprids and cattle. Fishing mainly focused on tuna fish, oysters, gathering of oysters and seashells. So our question here is, can we in fact test the reliance on marine resources by early Bronze Age to Yenibademlihük inhabitants? In other words, how significant was the role of marine resources? If it was too significant, then we are expecting not to see a significant increase in population, because our platform, our agent-based modeling platform, can only simulate agropastoral food sources. They can only grow wheat, barley, and they can only raise sheep and goats. They can't really do fishing. Not anyway. Hopefully, we will integrate that. So the question is that how significant was the role of marine resources in the diet of the early Bronze Age too? And can we actually see this in population as a proxy? Also, the side question is that, okay, what was the human impact for this 200-year period? What you see here is the scenarios, the 6 scenarios that we ran. The results here are based on the 200-year-long simulations that were iterated for 10 times. Because of the advancements in the agent-based modeling platform, we can now, in fact, fine-tune the ratio of agriculture to pastoralism, okay? If you want, you can make them fully agriculturalist. If you want, you can make them fully pastoralist. Or if you want, you can define a certain combination that you like. Climate, in terms of annual precipitation, we have different climate types. Again, normal climate, as indicated by the climate model, paleoclimate model. But also, we actually decreased or increased the annual precipitation by 15% in order to see what is the impact of climate, especially precipitation, on the production. What you see here is in orange. You see the grazing catchment for animals, okay? And in this brown area, what you see is the agricultural catchment. Basically, agricultural activities will be focused within this area, And herding, they can actually herd anywhere in this area. The rule is that herders cannot really take their animals into fields when there is, in fact, produce still out in the field. They can only bring their animals after the harvest. So this is coded as a rule. And this is the bay. So bay is not included in our estimates, and the red dot represents the site itself. What you see here is the cumulative erosion and deposition rates. Cumulative erosion and deposition, maximum of 2 centimeters, is in fact minimal. Because when we compare this with almost a meter of cumulative erosion and deposition at Aslantepe, this is in fact minimal, because a couple of centimeters is incredibly low erosion deposition pattern. The reason for this is, in fact, one, this area is relatively flat. Okay, the location of the site is relatively on a flat terrain, so there's really not much going on in terms of natural surface processes. And two, as I will explain later, we do not really see a significant change in population after 200 years. We actually started the simulations with 200 individuals of about 50 households, 200 individuals. And in 200 years, this population did not really change significantly. In some cases, population went below 170, 160. In some cases, population went above 200, about 225, 230 people, but then it actually went down to 200 individuals. So in 200 years, not increasing the population is an important result. What we see here is that erosion deposition doesn't really change with climate type. With any climate type, we are seeing less than 1 meter of erosion deposition in all these cases. In terms of land cover change, from maximum biodiversity, there is really no significant change again, because what we see throughout the simulation at the end about America is that these people cannot really sustain their population by practicing traditional agricultural and pastoralism. In other words, relying on rainfall to grow wheat and barley and raising animals like ovicapids, sheep and goats, these practices, these subsistence practices, really did not bring too much to these people in terms of caloric gain. Therefore, in 200 years, we do not really see a significant change in that, in the biodiversity. What we see in terms of land cover change is it's really minimal. It is centered around the site, but to a great extent, these people did not really degrade their environment. They did not cause significant environmental degradation. And again, this is part of the reason. This is partly the result of low population densities. In terms of total population changes, what you see here is that population really drops significantly with 50% agriculturalist, 50% pastoralist scenarios. Real change in population, ups and downs, oscillating population, emerges with 80% agriculturalist, 20% pastoralist scenarios. And these, in fact, tell us that agripastoral activities did not really cause significant environmental degradation around the Enebademlik, mainly because these people could not really sustain their population without integrating marine resources. The use of marine resources, fishing and gathering shellfish, provided important caloric gain for early Bronze Age 2 inhabitants at Enebademlik. And population cannot be sustained without any combination of agriculture and pastoralism. As a result, we do not really see significant changes in the model because the model does not really simulate marine resources. And consequently, we do not see a significant change in erosion and deposition. So the major conclusions, the final major conclusions from this these experiments is that one, models are not intended to reconstruct the past. Obviously, it's not our aim. We cannot really reconstruct the past dynamics at a full scale, but we can reasonably simulate these processes by simplifying them to a certain extent. And ABM experiments, ABM results should only be accepted as experiments, okay? They're only giving us clues about the past socio-ecological interactions. As part and parcel of this, we can observe the emergent phenomena, such as the increase in population and its ripple effects on the ecosystem, on the social organization, and also on the economy of these groups. We can only express our empirical data in the form of algorithms in these agent-based modeling experiments. So it's very important for us to be able to think in quantitative terms, to turn the empirical data into values that we can measure and we can assess. And we have to remember that in agent-based modeling platforms, we almost always allow agents with certain degrees of freedom. We integrate chance operations, randomness into these models. So not everything is hardwired. There are certain behaviors that we wire so that they act in a certain manner, but also we integrate chance events or randomness in order to simulate the real world events. Finally, I have to express that agent-based modeling experiments change the nature of archaeological research and bring hypothesis testing capabilities, which is, I believe, the most exciting aspect of this research. So thank you so much for your attention. And I'm sorry that some strange people just entered and tried to distract us, but nevertheless, we've completed this, the first series successfully, I believe. Of course, as in any other research, agent-based modeling research is also the result of wide networks. So I would like to thank all these individuals and institutions and for their support in this research. First and foremost, of course, I have to thank my students and the close network of colleagues that I've been collaborating. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Bülent Hocam. It's really wonderful and very extremely informative presentation, but unfortunately there were some technical problems and there was unpleasant interference from outside of our meeting. It's very normal sometimes because it's the online and situation. We have saying there is an idiom in Turkish, meyve veren ağaç taşlanır. Maybe this is the same situation for us.
Exactly.
Anyway, but everything is wonderful. Thank you very much again. Also, this is the first experience, especially in name of the ARBA. Because of the reason, I would like to say thank you very much for your understanding.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, again, to come back to your presentation, your subject, the rising trend of the archaeology, recently gave us a very nice presentation on a subject. I am sure that these topics and this kind of fields of study are inspiring, especially to new and next and younger generation in the archaeology. However, we see how different readings we can make from the any kind of materials during the excavation time. It's really admirable, but it's not easy to understand easily. Also, as I said in the introduction, it's really different and but very, very important area, your field. but whose importance we unquestionably accepted for all of us. Now I would like to say, as it's today, it's modern times, as it's very difficult to understand the ancient people independently of their surroundings, and we have to think about this normally. Now we would like to hear your questions and comments, dear guests and dear colleagues. Any question? Yeah. Excuse me just a moment, because please, Bülent Hocam,
Yes.
can you stop the share screen?
Stop share. Okay.
Yeah,
All
thank you very much. And I can see very clearly to who is raised hands. And Hafik Arhan, I hope so.
Yeah.
Arhan Kamaç, please. I would like to listen your comments or question.
I actually have a couple of questions, but they are related. So thank you again for this very informal, very intellectual and engaging presentation. And my question is related to the simulation of the ABM models and their results. You specifically said that the people living on that island were not able to sustain themselves without actually using any maritime production methods. And I was wondering if such a model or data is available to be integrated into ABM.
Yes, and your question, your question is actually a fantastic one. We are planning actually to integrate those. How should I say? Not unconventional resources, of course, into the agent-based modeling platform, because we're all aware of the fact that most of these people lived on land, and they did not really have access to a lake or a sea. So initially, this model, like many other ABM platforms, they were developed for fully terrestrial societies. That's why we start with wheat, barley, and ovicapids. And I believe that it's now time, if someone hasn't done it already, I'm sure that it's now time to integrate these resources. It's not very difficult to integrate them. It's just a matter of sitting down and doing some calculations in terms of calorie gains, etc. But I believe that it's time now for us to do that.
And my final question is that have you ever heard of a study where they tried to model the influence of trading into these ABM models? There are
approaches like that. I know that we have a colleague in Turkey at the Middle East Technical University. As far as I remember, the research team that he's part of has been doing that. Not MML, of course. We're not simulating trade. But there are a couple of other methods. There are a couple of other approaches in agent-based modeling world where you can, in fact, integrate trade as an option.
Okay.
And I believe that in the near future, this landscape, agent-based modeling landscape, will remain as it is. There are some models that simulate certain events more successfully than others. Like the strength of MML is really simulating the erosion, deposition, and changes in land cover rather than trade, for example.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for your answer.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you very much, Hafik, your question. It's nice. And then what else? Any question from our guest? I think your presentation is very clear because of this reason. There is no question. Just only I would like to a question. It's very maybe basic question. Especially I want to learn what should we archaeologists pay attention during the working on the field, surveying or excavation time. we can understand the more clearly and more easily understand to the
Exactly.
kind of environmental
Yes.
project.
No, that's actually a critical question, and thank you so much for asking this, because when I'm presenting at conferences and places like this, the common question is that, or sometimes chatting afterwards is, how can we do this? And the real issue here, I believe, is that designating or designing the archaeological research from day one as an interdisciplinary project. For us to be able to simulate these behaviors in the long term, it requires identification of subsistence patterns with greater accuracy. What are they eating? How many people are we talking about? How are they producing this stuff? Where are they keeping their animals? What is the climate like? What is the natural environment like? And how did it really change in the long term? So really focusing on one period and building like blocks, building it from start to finish. The reason I was able to run these simulations at Malatya and Yenibademli is mainly because that these are long-term projects. Okay, Yenibademli went on for more than 26 years. Asantepe has been going on for several decades now, and they have accomplished and they've compiled large sets of data so that these are usable for agent-based model.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments and for your suggestion.
My
especially
pleasure.
maybe the last details. Especially, I would like to learn from your opinion. What kind of suggestion to especially new, especially what are your recommendation to young or maybe next generation students who want to be specialized in your field?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Especially, I think the computer is, and I think it should be wonderful. Yeah?
Right. Well, I believe that our young generation researchers, our students, whether they are in archaeology departments or in other departments and interested in archaeology, they should first and foremost learn statistics, coding, especially with the Python language, and trying to familiarize themselves with computer programs such as geographical information systems and visualization softwares. But I think the critical element is that, understanding the programming, understanding coding, and, trying to think on quantifiable terms, okay? Not in identifying the objects, but also quantifying them, trying to develop some sort of number working element.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your.
Thank you.
Is there any question or comment? I think there is no question or your comments.
Okay.
Again, thank you very much, Bülent Hocam.
Thank you.
It's very nice and it's very productive presentation for us. And I hope the next meeting, it will be about new presentation on January 6th. And we are going to talk about the zooarchaeology. Until then, stay well. And thank you very much for your attention and for your attending to the meeting. Görüşürüz Bülent Hocam. Tüm katılımcı arkadaşlarımız için de çok teşekkür